I suspect that some of our elephants in our rooms, as we use Agile, as we transition to Agile, are pretty substantial. And when I started talking to people about where Agile is, first I heard, well, Agile has made the transition. Agile has crossed the chasm. I am a contrarian. I do not believe that Agile has crossed the chasm. In fact, I actually think that Agile is in the early adopters. I think that Agile is pretty close to the middle of the early adopters. And why do I think that? Because we've done the easy part of Agile. We have figured out how to make Agile work for small teams in mid-sized organizations. And if you actually talk about really large organizations with large transformations, you can pick out 2 or 3 successful organizations that have kept their Agile transition over 2 or 3 years. And you can point to a lot more Agile transitions where they have had the fallback to waterfall or to some chaotic approach to software development, where they are trying again and again and again and again to try and make that transition to Agile. And none of you have to raise your hands, but if you're in a very large organization and you are in a successful pocket of Agile development, you probably feel alone. And you are probably protecting your little pocket of development. And you are probably holding up fences saying, don't touch me. I am successful. Did I lose my, I made it, oh, all right, I'll scream. Thank you, Eugene. Does that mean I can't gesticulate?
You can.
Oh, good, I'm a gesticulator. And I've been practicing with my vertigos. Now I'm solid on both feet right now. So, okay, get ready for gesticulation. So, I mean, I've worked with some organizations where they've said, if transitioning to Agile throughout the organization means I'm going to lose what I have, leave me alone. I have it all set for me. I'm doing, you know how the dogs in the neighborhoods have that little invisible shield and they can go no farther than the boundaries? Do we only have this in the US? They can only go around the boundaries of their property, and then something happens to them. I don't know. Oh God, they only have this in the US because they get an electrical shock. In Canada, you're much nicer here. This is one of, you probably let your dogs go into the neighbors' yards. You probably do. Okay, but in the US, we have this thing where they get an electrical shock, and so they don't go into the neighbors' yards. But I have been working with some clients who have said, we're not going to abandon Agile, but don't ask me to give up what I'm doing for the benefit of the organization, because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to lose what I've got. And what I've got is too good to lose. This is an astonishing approach to transitioning for the good of the organization. Why? Why would people say, I'm going to optimize for myself and not optimize for the good of the whole? So that is an elephant in the room. That's a huge elephant that's sitting in the middle of the room, doing what elephants do, aside from stink. So I don't think that Agile has come anywhere near crossing the chasm. And that is a huge issue in our Agile transformation. we cannot go post-Agile if we cannot actually transition to Agile. So as I walk through this talk, or as I talk through this talk, think about what you wrote down on your card and think about what does it mean for your organization if that's happening all over the world, because it's happening in different places. Different places have different problems, and maybe that's not your specific problem. Maybe you have actually transitioned, and you are bringing along the late majority and the laggards in your particular organization. But there are plenty of other organizations who have not made the transition. So let me ask you for just a little bit of data. This is my general Agile picture, where you have lots of ideas in the organization, and somehow they get funneled into a responsible human being who says, I'll create a backlog and give it to a cross-functional team. I'm reverberating somehow. I don't think I'm doing it to myself. Okay, some people are standing up and doing something great. Okay, that cross-functional team periodically, okay, I'll just scream. That's fine. Periodically releases a chunk of shippable product, and periodically releases more shippable product, and periodically releases more and more shippable product. I'm being pretty vague about how they periodically release, because it could be through flow, it could be through iterations. I'm not saying that their periods have to be completely regular, but they release shippable product on a regular basis. And that's very helpful to the people who come up with all of these ideas, and especially this responsible person who can then reprioritize this ranked backlog. And they show this shippable product, and eventually they somehow release this shippable product, although not necessarily every single time they have it. Now, since it's a little cool in here, but not as frigid as when I walked in this morning, I would like to get some data by having you all stand up, and then we will sit down as I ask you some questions. So please stand up. Now, since you're all in Vancouver, I expect almost no one to sit down. If I've just explained something to you that seems totally foreign, and you've never heard of this before, and you thought you understood Agile, but my explanation seems like I've been drinking something, you can sit down now. Yeah, I didn't think so. You guys have seen Agile 101 and have been through it, so I didn't think that. But if you think that you are almost doing this, but you don't always have shippable product, because maybe your testers aren't integrated into your iterations, or maybe you have a little bit of a problem with your continuous flow, but you have the idea of this, but it's hard for you to always have shippable product on a regular basis. You can sit down. Yeah, because you're human. You're human. And then, yeah, you're in transition. You're in transition. See, I don't think it's fair for anyone to call you a butt. See, all of those of you who sat down, a lot of people would call you Agile butt or Scrum butt. And that's just totally unfair. You are in transition, which I think is a much more reasonable approach, because it's true, you're in transition. And then those of you who are still standing, you have demos, or you have releases, you have a way of knowing that you actually have shippable product on regular iterations. This is a question. You should all be saying, yes, we have verifiable ways of knowing. Yes, JR? Yes, if you don't have a verifiable way of knowing, please sit down. Okay. And then the rest of you, thank you for standing up. Okay. So, there are some other questions that I could be asking, but what I find is that when I ask these kinds of questions, that people who think that they're agile, when I ask, you know, are you in transition towards agile, they say, well, yeah, I am. And that's a great place to be, because there's nothing wrong with being in transition towards agile or transition towards lean. I'm using agile and lean as interchangeable modules, and maybe that's not fair of me, but I'm going to use it as a blanket cover for now. But there's nothing wrong with being in transition towards another way of doing business if it gets you more business value. Because that's what we're all about, is business value. Now, what I see, and what other people are seeing, is that a lot of people are saying, well, we're adopting Agile, but it goes for breadth, not depth, across the organization. And so I did about a half an hour's worth of research on the web, of course, because is there any other way to do research these days? I did not do a survey, which I guess I could have done, but I almost quake in fear of doing research surveys, because poor Scott Ambler gets crucified every time he does a survey. And to be honest, I did not take the time to do a survey, because I had other things to do that were going to pay me, as opposed to do a survey that was not going to pay me. So I did half an hour's worth of research on the web. And I found some stuff that was behind firewalls that was tantalizingly close. And I found this that was not behind a firewall, that actually did prove what I thought. I have empirical data with my clients that says we transition to Agile breadth first, which is we try and have the Agile dosage, right? When you're thinking of doing something, you say, how many projects can I actually dose with the Agile dropper? How many projects can I give a little bit of Agile to? I have been very fortunate this year. I have done keynote speeches in something like 6 countries on a number of continents. And I have been able to talk to many, many people before, during, and after these speeches. And so I was in Australia and New Zealand earlier this year, and I was speaking with one of the very large IT companies there and with a very large product company. And so for those of you who believe, as I do, that product companies and IT companies are sometimes the same and sometimes quite different, they are. And in this particular instance, they were quite the same. Product company, IT company, we're talking something like 150, 200 projects each, both with a little dropper of Agile goodness. What I mean by a dropper of Agile goodness, 200, 250 projects, let's give them all half a day of Agile training. Half a day of Agile training. Those of you who have actually successfully transitioned to Agile, what does half a day of Agile training give you?
Stand up for your status meeting.
Stand up for your status meeting.
Enough knowledge to fail.
Enough knowledge to fail. The words? Maybe. Right, but does it give you almost anything useful? I think think it's almost worse than nothing. Yes, sir.
I would say it's unethical to give someone half a day of training. If you're a training provider, and I'm not kidding, I wouldn't go in and do that.
Yeah, I'm not even, yeah, I have my reservations about this also. This was in-house Agile training. I wondered about the trainer that gave them a half a day of training. Okay, so we can, maybe this is for the reception later tonight over wine. Right? You haven't seen me. I don't need any wine to get going. So, you know, just give me tap water. I'm fine. So it's a very interesting problem. So they all got dosed with half a day of Agile training, right? The eyedropper worth of Agile training. And they said, go to it. And these poor people, they did not understand why Agile did not work for them. Well, I can explain it. They weren't doing Agile. And then their managers wanted to know why Agile did not work for us. Well, they weren't doing Agile. They were hacking. They were in total chaos. And they had no idea of what was going on. So they had breadth, but they sure did not have any depth at all. And when you start thinking about what does it mean to have breadth and no depth, then you start looking at what this means for Agile adoption and what this really means about the elephant in the room. And go back and think about your cards. And you think, oh my goodness. Or if you were like me, you probably noticed, if I have a thought, it not only is in my head, it's through my mouth and on my face. I don't play poker, right? It's there. I managed to not say what the expletive deleted were you thinking. I managed not to say that because these poor people had no idea what they were missing. They were the victims of the Agile eyedropper. They were not, and their management were the victims also. No one had any idea what was going on. So what I see is that the intent of Agile has crossed the chasm. And we see things like iteration. If I hear the word iterations will save us one more time, I think, well, you know, we've had time boxes from time immemorial. I taught project management back in the 90s. And I've been a project manager since the 80s. And I have used the word time box in my work for a very long time because I am actually a lazy bum. If you're a lazy bum, you use time boxes. And people say to me, how do you write so many books? And I say, because I'm lazy and I use time boxes. And they say, you're lazy and that's how you write books? I say, yeah, because if I don't time box what I'm doing, I can't get anything done. And they say, oh. So if you're lazy, you use time boxes and that's how you get stuff done. Yeah. Right, you guys are not laughing. You didn't get that? This does not make sense to you? Say yes, JR. Oh, for Pete's sake. Okay, that one died. Okay, what I really like is when people say, I have to refactor. And I say, okay, how long is it going to take you to refactor? And they say 6 months. Well, thank goodness you left it that way. And I say, that's not refactoring, that's re-architecting. And they say, oh no, it's refactoring. And I say, oh, are you going to be using continuous integration so that what you're doing is available every single day? And they say, oh no, we're branching. And so it's not, we're branching onto a separate code line. This is not going to be available for 6 months. And I say, you're re-architecting, you're not refactoring. Is Michael Feathers here? No, not yet. He'll be here later, right? Okay. So I say, you're not refactoring. Even a management geek like me knows. Do not pull one over on my face. This is not correct. And they say, oh no, I'm refactoring. And I say, you can use the word all you want. You are re-architecting. And so then we, of course, decline into a, yes, I am. No, you're not. And then we sound like we're 3 years old playing in the sandbox. So the words have crossed the chasm. Oh, and then I love it when people talk about stories. And then they say, the system shall. And I say, no, if it's a story, it has to have a user. And then they say, the customer. Which customer? Oh, the customer. And I say, well, is the customer a developer? What do you mean? The customer can't be a developer. I say, sure it can. What about the tester? The tester is a customer too. No, sir. I swear sometimes, you know I am an adult, but sometimes I have these conversations and I sound like I am still 6 years old. And then, let's talk about TDD, test-driven development. I wish I could tell you that back when I was a developer, I approached test-driven development with open arms. And I would be lying because I did not. I had to be dragged kicking and screaming into test-driven development. And the only reason I did was because my very first pairing partner in 1982 insisted that we do test-driven development. We didn't have a name for it at the time because we didn't have a name. He said, this is how I'm going to work with you, JR. And I said, I don't like it. I told you I was immature, right? I already said this. And he said, well, I'm the senior person of the pair, and this is also the wrong way to do pairing, but this is how I did it. And he said, well, you have to do it with me because I'm telling you what to do. And I said, well, I don't like it. And he said, but it's so much easier if we write our tests first. And besides, if we write our tests first, then we'll figure out how the design is supposed to look. It's really about design. I said, well, I'm not that good at architecture. And he said, oh, JR, just come on. And so he figuratively took me by the hand and said, look, if we write the test like this, and then you'll see how the design is supposed to work. And I said, oh, all right. And so for 3 weeks when I paired with him, I actually had a much better product. Did I change my ways? No. But I did have 3 weeks of practice with it. So when I finally matured and learned how to do TDD, I said, oh, okay, I understand this. And now when I write, I actually use TDD. Right? What are the questions I want to answer in this particular chapter or paragraph? Which helps me a lot. But there are people who use TDD and say, oh, this really works. But then there are people who say, TDD just doesn't work here. Our system is too complex. Our system doesn't work. And Gerard, are you actually talking this week about TDD?
Yes.
So anyone next session.
Yeah.
See, I thought I read that. So anyone who doesn't believe that should just go talk to Gerard. But this is the problem. There are still people who don't believe this. And then my favorite one of all is retrospective. Now, Esther and Diana have written this fabulous book about retrospectives. And when I talked briefly about retrospectives in my tutorial yesterday, there were still people who hadn't heard of their wonderful book. There are still people who think about retrospectives as a blank fest. There are still people who think about retrospectives as a couple of questions that say lessons learned. So the intent has crossed the chasm, but the breadth has not, the depth of knowledge has not crossed the chasm. And this is the problem. This is the elephant in the room. We've written a ton of books. We've written a ton of articles and blog posts. The information is there. But how do we get the information to the people? So I don't think that Agile has crossed the chasm. And I think that that is a serious problem. And it's a serious problem because it's not about technical information. It's not about how do we do things. It's actually a really interesting problem. And one of the big problems is that we have all of these tests and all of these certifications and all of these assessments. And I think that one of the biggest problems we have is online assessments and certifications. If I see one more hiring manager, or actually it's in the HR realm, say, we need a certified Scrum Master. First of all, Scrum is not equivalent to Agile. Let's just get that out there. I think that Scrum has done a great many things for Agile. The fact that Scrum has tremendous marketing appeal is wonderful. I think it's fabulous. And it might actually be worth it to take out an ad in the New York Times and say, Scrum, bang, equal, Agile. Right? Scrum does not equal Agile. Of course, the only ones who would recognize that are my fellow geeks, because who else would understand bang, equal? So I would have to write it in English. That was for you, my fellow geek from last night. So it's really important to understand this. A 2-day course does not make you a master of anything. An online assessment cannot tell you whether or not you are actually doing anything useful in your approach to Agile. I have a client who is really concerned about one of his guys on, quote, a team of projects. This guy does not want to do stand-ups. And I said, well, this is very interesting. Why does your guy not want to do stand-ups? And my client said, I don't know. I said, have you asked him? And he said, well, no, I'll ask him before our next coaching session. So my client asked him. And the poor developer said, I'm the only one on this project. A stand-up with you is a status report. I said, I'm going to call my client John, because his name is not John. John is a very common name, at least in the US. I said, John, why do you have a one-person project? Quote, I only need one person on this project. Do you ever feel like you bang your head against the wall? I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall. I said, John, there is no such thing as a one-person project. Do you not need documentation? Do you not need testing? Does John not need anyone else to talk to on this project? Are you sure this is a one-person project? Well, he needs a little bit of DBA help, but not permanently. So it's not a one-person project. And he needs a little testing help, but not permanently. So it's not a one-person project. Well, and he needs a little bit of other developer help, but not permanently. I said, is this developer working on any other projects while you have him on this project? Well, he's helping out over here. I said, okay, let's go back to square one. How many other projects is this developer working on? Right, so the problem is that my client was trying to measure this particular developer by an irrational measure, right? Which is how many stand-ups does he do? Is he doing a stand-up? Which is a stupid measure to begin with, right? It makes no sense for the context. He's optimizing again at the lowest possible level instead of optimizing at the highest possible level, which is how much multitasking is going on in the organization, right? Instead of looking at the people doing their work, he should have been looking at himself and how many projects is he actually trying to ask people to do. So it's a really interesting problem when you start looking at tests and assessments. And what are they actually measuring? I think that that's one of the elephants in the room. So looking at what are people asking for on job descriptions makes people start optimizing at the wrong level. Now, am I going to tell you not to go get a certification? No! You'd be foolish not to. Go get them. Get lots of letters after your name. Go get that next job if it makes sense for you. And then work to change the system from the inside. Because only you know what it's worth to you. Right? That's the key. So when I dig a little deeper, even with these certifications and assessments, what I hear and what I see is people doing 6 and 7 and 8 week iterations. I actually had someone say to me that they were Agile, they were doing 12-week iterations. I said, you do know that 12 weeks is a quarter, right? And there's only 4 of them in a year. You do know that, right? And they said, oh yeah, but it's better than a year-long iteration. Hey, this is a glass half full kind of guy. No question about it. I was working with an organization who said, we are so confident of our shippable product that we don't need demos. I said, how do you know that it's actually shippable if you never talked to anybody about it? How do you know you're doing the right thing? How do you re-rank the product backlog? Well, we just know. And so I said, so do you have the Vulcan mind meld down? Because if you do, I want to know how you do it. Because I don't have the clairvoyance thing with anybody. Not my husband, not my kids, not anybody. And if you know how to do it, I want to know how. Because if you have a recipe, there are people I would like to have the Vulcan mind meld with. I think this would be really good. They didn't answer me. And I haven't been invited back. So, all right, fine. There are still Agile teams that say, we have a handoff to QA. How do you have a handoff in an Agile team? Right? And when you look at their velocity chart, you see that stories don't get done, stories don't get done, stories don't get done, and at the end of the iteration, stories get done. It's a hockey stick. Right? So if you look, and their QA people end up spending nights at the end of the iteration. And they end their iterations supposedly on a Friday. You know what that means? The QA people spend all weekend in the office. If I was a QA person, I would say, let's not end iterations on Friday anymore. Let's end iterations on Wednesday. That's a perfect way to do it. Or end iterations on Thursday, or end iterations on Tuesday. I would not do that, or I would not come into the office. And I love it when people say, TDD doesn't work here, or continuous integration doesn't work here. There are lots of things that don't work here. Or the overhead of a 2-week iteration is too high. Overhead. Overhead is a red flag that says something doesn't work here, and that means you have to do it more. Right? You are not optimizing Agile for the way that you work. You have to do it more often if it's painful. There is no reason you shouldn't be able to get down to a 1-week iteration unless there's some business need to not be able to get down to a 1-week iteration. I am more and more convinced that the right way to do Agile is to actually go to Kanban. Right? That the right way to do this is to actually be able to move to continuous flow. That the iteration is a crutch for you to be able to get your story small enough to be able to move to continuous flow. So Gerard is nodding. Oh, thank God. And I'm not the only one who thinks like this. Right? And so when I say to people, I've given up on iterations altogether for myself, because my iterations are now, my time boxes are a couple hours just to get me over the hump of doing something, right? The iteration for teams exists so that the team can figure out how to get all together, right? And so if this is what you really need, fine. Then this is how you collaborate. This is how you get yourselves together. But if something doesn't work here, you have to figure out how to do more of it, not less of it. So when you start digging a little deeper and you realize that things are not working, you have to ask yourself, why? Why is this happening? So when I first started putting this keynote together, I should tell you this is something like Rev 467 of this keynote. I have done this keynote so many times, I'm not even sure what's in it anymore. I was going to talk to you about Agile in the large, and for product owners, overloaded operators, and project portfolio management, team creation, and that management has to be leadership, and that we needed a true Agile culture. And I thought, you know, I've talked about this stuff to you guys a lot, because I've been here a while. And that I should actually take a leap and talk to you about something totally different. So I am. I'm going to talk to you about something totally, completely different. And that what Agile really means is that you have personal and cultural change. And so I could totally fail, or I could really knock this one out of the park. So we'll see what happens. What the heck? So when I say that Agile encourages, I almost said requires personal change. What I mean is that if you really do Agile the right way, you have to build in, inspect, and adapt into your work. Right? Because if you do not build in, inspect, and adapt, you keep doing things the same old way. And so when you hear people say, this thing doesn't work here, they have not built in this growth mindset. Is Linda rising here yet?
No, but later today.
She's coming today, right? Yeah. So Linda gave this incredible, fabulous, wonderful keynote speech at Agile 2011. And I know that they, Todd, you guys taped it, right?
It's taped and it's live now.
It's live?
It's there
Okay.
on the website.
And you should watch it.
Well, she's repeating it tomorrow.
Oh, wonderful. Then I'll just give you a little preview of it. You should be here. You should all watch. Is she keynote? Excellent. Then I won't say anymore. But she really inspired me to read this book. And the book is about the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. And you have to be able to use this growth mindset in your work. And if you don't use this growth mindset, you get really stuck. And one of the things that happens with the growth mindset is that it prepares you for cultural change. Now, every organization has its own culture. And when you think about culture, you have to think about what the organization rewards, what you can talk about, and how people treat each other. Because if you don't think about that, you can think about other more sort of superficial ways, superficial ideas of culture. And every organization has its own, and managers and leaders imprint their own culture on top of the organizational culture. And everyone imprints their own personal beliefs on top of the organizational culture. So those of you who were at my influence tutorial yesterday, we spoke a little bit about what this means for culture and how you use influence. But just imagine how the rest of the culture really affects culture. So if you think about the fixed mindset that says, we really think about how things work here. When you think about the fixed mindset, you think we hire for talent. And talent is absolutely all you need. Right? This is why you hire for certifications. So when you see job descriptions that say, and I've seen these job descriptions that say, PMP and CSM. Now, on the face of it, that seems like a pretty funny job description. Why would you need a PMP and a CSM? This is someone who's pretty risk averse. Someone who doesn't want to take a lot of uncertainty. Someone who says, I want to manage my uncertainty. I don't want a lot of chaos. I want to make sure that we have as little chaos as possible. I want to make sure that we have people who know where they fit into the structure of the organization. And you think about an Agile team and you think, does that fit with an Agile team? Well, not my Agile teams. And then you think about someone, well, not all Agile teams are like me. I'm sort of on the extreme edge of anti-authoritarianism, right? If there's authority, I'm probably against it. So, and not all of you, in fact, probably very few of you, would be happy working with me. So, you have to find what kind of culture would make you feel good, because some of you would not be happy working with me. So, the growth mindset says, start with reasonable people who can learn, and then help them learn. And this is where inspect and adapt comes in. Because if you really have people who can learn, and they learn from inspection and adaptation, then you have to just start with reasonable people. But then you have to know how to hire reasonable people. And then tests and assessments don't help you with that. This is a really different, this changes the game for how you look at people in the organization. Right, this different mindset. If you change how you hire, if you change how you create teams, this means you don't have to look for experts anymore. You have to look for people who are good, who can learn. When I say to people, we need generalizing specialists or specializing generalists, and never put an expert on something alone. Always pair an expert with a generalist so that the other person can learn. There are managers who look at me like I have 15 heads, not just 2 heads, but they cannot imagine where I'm coming from for that. Because they cannot imagine that someone else can learn the database. They cannot imagine that someone else can learn the middleware. They cannot imagine that someone else can learn the front end or the back end. They are so convinced that only certain people can learn this part of the architecture. and that no one else can learn it. You know, there is something to be said for having grown up in the 70s and 80s and being really close to the hardware. Back when I was a developer. You know, if there's also something to be said for having a cane. Back when I was a developer. Back in the Neanderthal age. Although I have to stand up straight when I do that. We did everything. It never occurred to us not to do everything. When I worked on mini computers, I had to modify the operating system. I had to modify the application. I had to work in assembly language. I had to work in Fortran, which was really not so bad. I had to be able to read what the compiler output in assembly language, in Octal. I had to be able to patch paper tape. It was not so bad. I do not want to go back to the bad old days. I really like the fact that I can do everything from a GUI. And if I never have to read Octal again, I will still be a happy person. Because I don't think I can remember how to do it. But I didn't have any of these fake boundaries. And I learned a lot of stuff that turns out to be still very helpful now. Because I can tell when people are BSing me about the architecture. So it's not a terrible thing to learn a little bit past your boundaries. And it can be actually a very good thing. So having really solid boundaries about your work is not terribly good, and having very permeable boundaries about your work helps you with a growth mindset. And the more of a growth mindset you have, the more valuable you are to your company, the more valuable it is to your career, and the more agile you can become. Because as soon as you have a growth mindset about one thing, you can have a growth mindset about other things. It really helps as a technical person. And what's very interesting, as a technical person, Agile sort of demands this of us. But if agiling, that's not really a verb, is it? Well, the heck with it, I'll use it anyway. If you've been an Agile person on a technical team for a year and a half, and you're bumping up against what you can do on your technical team, and you want to bring your manager along, you have had a year and a half of Agile experience in your growth mindset. Your manager has not. Your manager is stuck in the fixed mindset. Your manager has not had a year and a half of practice in the growth mindset that you have. Your manager is not accustomed to inspecting and adapting every couple of weeks at the end of the iteration. And if you've been working in flow and you've decided that you still do a retrospective every week or two, or whenever you choose to, you have had a lot more experience inspecting and adapting than your manager has. You have changed your culture, and your manager has not. And that is a huge elephant in the room. That's one piece of the Agile transformation that no one else is talking about. Now that actually has a huge implication on power distance. I have references for this stuff in the back. In large power distance, people expect to be told what to do. And that actually refers to technical people even. In small power distance, they will expect to take on their own work. Well, that was the first thing we did in Agile, right? We expect to just take tasks off the board. We don't expect anyone to tell us what to do. We might go someplace and say, can I be of assistance? Jeff did that for me earlier today. He said, can I help you in any way? And I said, yeah, you know, I'm looking for Michael and he needs something. He said, yes, I can be of help. We do that all the time in Agile teams. But what happens if you have middle managers who really believe in large power distance? I've worked with a lot of middle and senior managers who say things like, I have 500 people in my organization. They expect the large power distance. They count their empires based on their people. They mean you and me. They're talking about us as their people, and they mean it in a patronizing way. They do. We're their serfs. They actually mean this power distance thing. They believe that they should have parking spaces, not because they have a cane. They believe that they somehow require parking spaces near the door because of their rank in the organization. This is a power distance thing. This is a huge problem in the organization. So it's not just growth mindset, it's the power distance. How do you get people like that to change their minds? How do you make it in their best interests to change what they know and how they have been rewarded all of these years? This is a cultural change that we have not addressed. And if we want them to buy into Agile, boy, oh boy, oh boy. I have some writing to do. Right, this is not something that we can just flip a switch and say, if you go to Agile, you get something from this. I don't know how, I don't know yet. Notice I say yet, how to address this one. I have to think of some good stuff. Because I am sure that something that they want will address this. But I don't know what it is yet. I'm sure I can find something in Agile. The next one is uncertainty avoidance. There are a lot of people who really like their rules and regulations. And it's not just rules and regulations. For example, HR exists to keep the company out of court. At least it does in the US. I'm assuming that some of that is in Canada. I don't know about other countries, but certainly in the US, HR exists to keep the company out of court. Again, HR in the US is neither human nor resourceful. I can only hope that it's different here. You'll notice that weak certainty avoidance is a strong belief in common sense and a tolerance for ambiguity and chaos. You cannot, if you look at our US government, you can only see that it's a strong uncertainty avoidance organization. I think that almost any government in the world is a strong uncertainty avoidance organization, which is why only pieces of a government can be classified as a weak uncertainty avoidance. But certainly, our companies can work towards a weak uncertainty avoidance, and IT organizations inside companies can go to more towards weak uncertainty avoidance. And the real question is, what happens if you have managers with strong uncertainty avoidance? I think that that's, how do you help them? And I think that that's where having releasable, shippable product more often with demos can really help them understand, what does Agile buy them? Right, this is, I see a pretty strong connection here with what Agile buys them. I see a way to influence them. Now, I didn't name this one. This is called masculinity. It's not my name. Hofstede named it. It's all about personal recognition and a sense of achievement versus work with a cooperative team. Now, I like working with a cooperative team, and I really like being paid for what I do and having a sense of achievement. So when I first looked at this, I was masculine all the way, because inside the organization, if I'm going to do the work, I want to get paid for it and I want to be recognized for it. But once I became a consultant, I could set my own rules about how I was paid, and I choose to work with a cooperative team. So I find this very interesting. But this is how you decide who gets the bonuses and how do you do recognition. Who games the system, and when do you choose to attack the system? I think that there's a lot we can do here for how do you figure out, how do you make the system work for paying cooperatively. So I know that Mary and Esther are doing a lot of work around how do you have these conversations, and how do you make teams, and how do you pay them, and how do you at least start the conversation inside the organization. But it's an issue of culture. It's not an issue of anything else. I will tell you a story that when I was a manager inside the organization, they gave me a paltry $10,000 for a 7-person team and said, here, JR, you personally get the bonus for the team bringing this project in on time. And I said, are you totally nuts? If I take this $10,000 bonus and the people on the team realize I got the money for their work, do you think they're not going to let the tires, let the air out of my tires? I'm giving the bonus to the team. I'm no fool. And they said, you can't do that. And I said, watch me. Okay, they did the work. I was just the manager. And I said, okay, you guys, here's the bonus. What would you like to do with it? And they said, what do you mean? What would you like to do with it? I said, here, it's your bonus. I don't know what to do with it. I could divide it up equally, and you can all get whatever 10,000 is divided by 7. Or you guys can decide what to do with it. You did all the work. I helped you organize it. They were a self-organizing team, and I helped you run it, and I kept you going, and that was it, right? I did almost nothing for you, so what would you like to do with it? And a couple of them started talking to each other, and then they said, she gets 80%, we get the rest. And they all kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, that's right. I said, don't you want to talk about it some more? And they said, no, we really agree. This is exactly what we should do. I said, don't you want to do the math? And they said, JR, you're the only one who can't do math in her head. I don't do public math, arithmetic. I can only do symbols, right? I can do real math, not arithmetic. It's fine. We all know this about me. It's not a problem. I said, are you sure? And they said, yeah. And she said, I'm not sure. You guys all did a really great job. And they said, no, you were the one who knew what to do and when. She acted as the product owner. This is back in the 80s. We didn't have a name for it. She was the one who said, here's what we need to do when. Here are the features. No, that feature isn't quite right. Here's what to do. She was actually the tech writer. So here's what we need to do and when. And I'll document it as we go. And she was the heart and soul of the team. She got 80%. The rest of them split the 20%. She took them out for dinner. They had a great time. It was wonderful. I said, okay, it all goes down to da-da-da-da-da. Is my arithmetic right? Everyone said, surprisingly, yes. Okay? here, HR, make out the checks for these people this way. I'm happy, you're happy, everyone was happy. HR said, JR, this is a horrible thing. It's not. Hush, do it this way. What will you do the next time? I said, I will let the team decide again. I don't see what the big deal is. Well, you didn't get a bonus. I said, that's not my problem, is it? You guys could have given me a bonus for being a great manager. Instead, you tried to give me a bonus for someone else's work. I think that's pretty stinky. Oh, so it is. This is the kind of conversation you need to have. The question is, when do you have it? It's a problem. So the real issue, the issue about making the Agile transition across the chasm is that it's a huge cultural problem. It's a mindset problem, so you need to watch Linda tomorrow, today, tomorrow, whatever it is. And it's a huge cultural problem because it's an enormous transition for managers, and it's an enormous transition for the organization. Because if you don't change your mindset, you cannot transition to Agile. And as technical people, we have the advantage. We are able to make this transition every iteration or every time we finish a feature if we're using continuous flow. Because we get to do inspect and adapt, inspect and adapt, inspect and adapt. We have this opportunity all the time. So aside from the mindset belief, we have these different power distance beliefs. We have different uncertainty avoidance beliefs. We have these different values around what Hofstede calls masculinity. And that plays out not just in the teams, but as soon as you try and change what Agile, as soon as you try and move from a small co-located team, now it changes all across the organization. So it becomes an enormous, enormous problem. And then if you really want to think about what post-Agile looks like, now there's the issue of what does Agile in the large look like? Do you really want to start talking about program management, geographically distributed Agile, Agile architecture? Well, what does this look like for architects? Right? Do you think you don't have the same power distance problems with Agile architects? People who have been, Philippe is not here, right? Yeah. Think about the architects you know. How many of them act just like your senior managers with large power distance issues? It's a huge issue. So I have too many slides. I'm going to jump through and get to the end. Whoops, here. And say that crossing the chasm is a huge cultural change issue. And those of you who remember my talk from last year, remember that the Satir change model, that you start in old status quo, and that you have this foreign element. And as soon as you start bringing Agile to the rest of the organization, you go into something called chaos, where activity is an up and down kind of thing, until you get to a transforming idea, which is, I think at least for your managers, that your mindset has to change. And for some of them, their mindset's not going to change. On your teams, you have had the opportunity, those of you, a substantial portion of you, to weed out those people whose mindset did not change. You have been practicing Agile for a long time here in Vancouver, and you've been pretty darn good at it. You've had a lot of Agile one-on-ones, or one-on-ones. You have been practicing and been successful. Your managers have not had the same practice. And who's going to weed the managers out? Their colleagues? Not yet. It's a real problem. And then after the transforming idea, then it's practice and integration. And it's not just a straight line up. This takes time. And then you finally get to a new status quo, which is hopefully better than the old status quo. So this change model takes time. And it takes time for every single person. Every single person goes through it at their own rate. And you can't compress it. And sometimes something happens and people, whoosh, bang over back to the old status quo, because something happens. So, get ready for the ride. Some of it will be fun. Some of it will be, oh my goodness. So when I ask you, where are you going? I will ask you again, what is your biggest challenge with Agile in your organization right now? And you might want to reflect on the answer that you wrote down at the very beginning of my talk, because you might want to change your answer. So I hope that you have enjoyed the questions I have posed to you. Hofstede, Garrett Hofstede, I hope that's how he says his name, is the Cultures and Organizations Software for the Mind, 3rd edition, is the book that I referred to with the cultures, and Carol Dweck is the mindset book. I hope that you have enjoyed this, and I am open to questions, because I suspect you have some. Thank you. Questions? Oh, I made you depressed. Yes.
You mentioned you don't feel Agile's crossed the chasm, and I'm wondering, given the nature and how many different project management styles have been out there, have been tried, and are often, even the waterfall cases, done wrong, does anything ever cross the chasm with management techniques like Agile and Lean, and Six Sigma? And there's so many of them. None of them ever seem to become mainstream across.
So for example, phase development did cross the chasm. Waterfall is a form of phase development. Incremental approaches have definitely crossed the chasm. Those crossed the chasm back in the 80s.
As your example, you're saying that so many people in Agile are not really understanding the fundamentals of Agile, and that's why, while everybody is talking about it, and in some cases claiming they're doing it, they're not really doing it. And yet, I think that anybody who's sort of seen a number of waterfall organizations, the tendency to call what people are doing waterfall without it actually being anything like waterfall in a traditional sense is pretty common, if not more common than actually seeing it.
Well, so the question is, if you look at what people call waterfall and what they're doing. So code and fix has certainly crossed the chasm, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at what the SEI has done and what they have data on, and that phase development in that sense has crossed the chasm, and Six Sigma, I think, has crossed the chasm for a certain number of organizations. And if you look at some of the data for the people who say, we are doing this approach to development, and you look at the rigor with which they're doing it, there are people who say that they are doing, I guess that for me, if you think about the claim of doing it versus the rigor of doing it. That's when I think about crossing the chasm. So there are people who say that they're doing something versus the rigor. If you look at the sheer number of people doing whatever they claim versus the sheer number with their rigor, I don't see the sheer number claiming to do Agile with the rigor of doing Agile that I even saw back in the 90s with the sheer number claiming to be SEI level 2, with the sheer number saying that they were claiming to be SEI level 2 with the rigor of it. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Agile started mostly from kind of bottom up.
Yes.
So what's kind of your view? What's happening now? That we still kind of moving from bottom up, or some people, middlemen, will introduce them and so.
So what I'm seeing from Agile is certainly there's a large number of still bottom-up implementations of Agile. And what I'm actually getting requests for is a lot of bottom-up and top-down. So I'm getting requests from senior management to say, JR, please help us to do this, but they're not talking to their middle managers. So the middle managers are really stuck. This is, they're getting squeezed, and so the middle managers don't know what their jobs are. And so unless somebody enlists the middle managers and so what I actually do is say, I would love to help you, and who are the middle managers that I should be working with? Because if the middle managers don't understand how their jobs are effective, then the middle managers start actively working against Agile, which is a huge problem.
This is very interesting observation because 4 years ago, in 2007, Michael Zwicker on this conference talked about exactly the same. Middle management in a large organization being huge impediment for the Agile adoption. 4 years ago, nothing changed.
Well, I don't know if nothing is changing, but I think it's a real problem because if the middle managers don't know what to do and senior management is not confiding in them, you know, what are they supposed to be, chopped liver? I mean, that's just crazy. They have a huge role to play in making sure that the Agile adoption goes well. Because often the senior management starts off something and wanders away because their attention is no longer on the Agile implementation. And if you don't have a sponsor in the middle management or often in the senior management, then the Agile implementation continues to be breadth first with the Agile eyedropper, and then nothing happens. Yes?
But for that problem that you just mentioned, doesn't that create the need to share a vision?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that not the starting point? Or I don't want to say it's the answer, but if you, without a vision, you're in trouble. And without, sharing that vision with the middle managers and walking the talk.
So I think you have to have a vision, and I think you have to back up the vision with action.
Exactly.
Yes. And so if you only have the vision, you plop on the floor. So if you plop on the floor because you don't have enough coaches, and you plop on the floor because you don't have enough training, you plop on the floor because you're not treating it like a project, like an Agile project with a product owner and releasable product. I mean, you should treat your Agile transformation like an Agile project.
But you give those middle managers, you create a bit, you let them know what is going to be expected of people like them in 3 years
Yes.
or 5 years, and
Yes.
what behavior is no longer acceptable.
Absolutely.
Right?
And put them in charge of the Agile transformation. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it seems like in a lot of large corporations, there's there's things like corporate governance and a separate QA organization, or enterprise architects. There's gates along the way that really influence how Agile can be adopted. It impacts the way that's being rolled out or implemented. Have you run into those scenarios, and what do you coach your customers to do?
Oh yeah, there are plenty of, large organizations have plenty of reasons to, have plenty of ways to make it difficult for themselves to move to an Agile approach. They have plenty of roadblocks that they have implemented before they even get going. So I urge them to enlist those organizations who help them, right? What would it take for us to move to an Agile approach? What do we have to do to make ourselves more Agile, right? Because those internal organizations exist now to deliver some form of business value. What do we need to do to make ourselves more Agile so we get the business value? Right? And start there with that question. Esther.
Well, I think we just hit on one of the things that's missing in a lot of Agile transitions is that people forget that they are doing it for some end of achieving, satisfying their customers, having good financial results, and creating an environment where people are satisfied with their working lives. And when they just talk about going Agile, there's nothing for people to hold on to or a vision for them to go forward to. But if it's tied to some end, I think it's easier for everybody, particularly those in middle management, to come along, assuming that all of the structures of the organization are not left in place to hold the old patterns of behaviors in place.
Right. Other questions? Well, on that happy note, think about your cultures, and if you would like me to stay in touch with you, I intend to be writing about this for a long time. I would love to stay in touch with you. Please fill out a yellow form, give me a business card. Thank you.